This production has been made possible through funding by the Australian Sports Commission. In order to perform to their maximum potential, footballers, as with athletes in any sport, must develop a high level of capacity in each of three major areas. Those three areas are skill, fitness, and psychological motivation. This videotape program is devoted to one of these essential subjects: fitness. Peter Schokman holds a Bachelor of Education in Physical Education with a diploma in Physical Education. He has a Bachelor of Arts and a secondary teacher certificate. He has been the fitness advisor for 5 Victorian League football clubs: North Melbourne, St Kilda, Hawthorn, Essendon, and since 1989, Carlton. He was physical education fitness advisor to the league state sides in 1979, 1982, and 1983. Peter Schokman is a lecturer in health and physical education at Victoria College at Burwood in Victoria.
We're all aware that a coach's function is to produce performance from each of his players at the highest possible level that individual is capable of producing. We also know that football performance is determined by an interrelationship between 3 factors. They are skill, mental application or psychology, and fitness. In this videotape, I'm going to cover what I consider to be the fitness essentials that will allow players to produce their very best performances. It's important for every coach to understand the relationship between fitness, skill, and psychology in player performance. For a start, a coach must know what the fitness components are for Australian rules football. He should then understand the methods of developing those components and the periodization, the timetable, if you like, over which these fitness components should be trained over the whole football year. Finally, he should understand the principles of training as they apply to each phase of the football year. I think that most coaches would be aware that fitness levels ultimately affect both the player's skill performance and his mental or psychological state during a game. A skilled but unfit player's performance will eventually drop away when he gets tired. He will lose his confidence and he will lose his positive approach. But a less skilled player who is fitter will very often exploit the more skilled but unfit player, and he will succeed more and more as the game proceeds. The fit player is more confident, he's mentally tougher, and is likely to become even more so as the quarters go by. So, for the coach to get the best out of his team, he must be vitally concerned about not only the skill levels of his players, and that they have the right mental approach, but also about their fitness, how it is developed, and how it can be maintained over a whole season. However, it's important for today's coach to have more than just a general understanding of how to develop fitness. There's more to football fitness than simply running laps and doing press-ups. Australian rules football is very much a running, high-collision sport that requires a number of components of fitness: endurance, speed, agility, jumping power, strength, and flexibility. Many components of fitness can be subdivided. So let's examine the first of those I've mentioned. Endurance, for example, in football relates to a running endurance as well as a muscle endurance. Muscle endurance is the ability of muscle groups to contract and keep on contracting during football activity. Running endurance is the capacity to keep running and moving over a whole game. Endurance is influenced by such factors as speed of movement, muscle force, body contact, and the efficiency or otherwise of skilled movements, all over a long period. Endurance is also the ability to withstand the effects of fatigue resulting from these factors. In football, players must have high levels of two types of endurance, aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic, or general endurance, is the ability to perform large amounts of football activity over a long period, to be able to cope with fatigue during games and training, and to be able to recover more quickly between football efforts, as well as helping recovery between games and training sessions. It's the foundation of endurance. Anaerobic or high-speed power endurance is essential for match play. It's the capacity to perform repeated, high-intensity running, jumping, tackling movements, again, over long periods of time. Endurance is probably the most important fitness component for football. The stronger the specific anaerobic endurance is developed from the more general aerobic endurance, the better the player's fitness level. Body composition is another element of fitness. The need for players to have a low body fat to high muscle tissue ratio. All these components of fitness are required by the modern footballer and need to be employed at high intensity or speed and under great pressure in a game that's played over a period of nearly 2 hours, where distances of up to 25 kilometers can be covered by some players. Now, my original listing of the elements of fitness includes speed and strength. You should note that both speed and strength combined is power, the capacity to perform powerful, explosive movement. Players must be powerful and agile, as well as having endurance, as the game requires them to perform repeated, high-velocity movements to the very limit of effort when they spring, jump, dodge, kick, hand pass, and tackle. Strength is crucial, and players have to be strong, not only in their lower trunk and legs, but also in their upper body, to successfully hold their ground against opponents when marking or tackling, and in general to withstand the buffeting and bumping that is part of the game. Flexibility, that's also important. It's an asset in sprinting, and its development is critical in injury prevention. So there you have the components of football fitness. Each player needs to develop these various components of fitness over the total football year. To do this, training for fitness must be planned and it must be organized sequentially. This is the concept of periodization I mentioned earlier. This simply means the coach needs to break the year up into various phases of training and then progressively develop each component of fitness. It's difficult for players to reach high levels of fitness quickly and then be expected to maintain the same peak levels of fitness for the whole year. The various aspects of fitness have to be systematically and progressively developed over a long period. Organized and planned properly, the coach should have his players close to full fitness when the playing season starts. Then it's a matter of keeping his players there for each week's game. So you have 3 basic phases of training over the total football year. They are the preparation phase, the competitive phase, and the transition phase. In other words, the pre-season, the in-season, and the off-season. The first 2 can be subdivided into general preparation and specific preparation, pre-competitive and competitive. The transition phase is not subdivided. For in-depth planning of activity, these various phases can then be divided again into macro cycles, and then once again into even smaller divisions of microcycles, representing weekly fitness training programs. Let's look at the last one first, the transition or off-season, which is also referred to as the active rest period. Now, during this period of some 6 to 8 weeks, players should be concerned with the 3 R's: rest, recovery, and rehabilitation. What footballers should do in the off-season is to basically recover physically and psychologically from the stresses of the competitive playing season. They need also to rehabilitate any injuries that they might have received. Players need to keep active and generally fit. Attention should be given to keeping their body weight, particularly their body fat, down to optimally low levels. In the general preparation phase of some 6 to 10 weeks, players start general fitness training. The aim is to establish a foundation of fitness in endurance and in strength. Weight training becomes very important during this phase. Training loads in endurance running and strength training in this general preparation period are gradually stepped up. Volume is increased, but the intensity is kept fairly low. There are 2 important training principles which need to be followed during the general preparation phase. The first is the principle of generality before specificity. This means that before any specialized training is started, there must be an all-round general development of the major muscle groups and the energy systems related to playing football. The major focus, particularly with younger players, is on developing aerobic endurance and general strength. This can be termed a multilateral development and is followed by more football-specific anaerobic fitness training. As athletes mature, the time spent on this multilateral development training decreases, and the time spent on more specialized training increases. The second principle to follow is that of progressive overload. For fitness improvements to occur, individual players have to be subjected to gradually increasing workloads, both in quality as well as in quantity, which over time allows the body to adapt and to produce the desired results. The rate of improvement is directly related to the rate and manner in which these increases are introduced. A similar training stimulus may have to be repeated several times before the body adapts to it and shows an improvement. However, too great or too abrupt an increase may lead to fatigue or injury, and if repeated too often, may take the body past the desired plateau and result in a slight reduction in fitness. During the general preparation phase of pre-season, players must develop their aerobic endurance to high levels. This can be done through the following methods. The first is continuous running. This simply means running steadily over distances ranging from 4 kilometers up to 10, 12 kilometers or even more. Continuous runs can be classified into slower type runs and faster type running. Now, for best results, the heart rate during these runs should be maintained somewhere between 70 and 80% of maximum heart rate. The heart rate should be constantly checked. To determine your maximum heart rate, simply subtract your age in years from 220. Therefore, a player aged 20 has a maximum heart rate of 200, and 80% of 200 is 160 beats per minute. The principle of progressive overload must be employed. Players should be running at least once a week using this continuous running method. The second method is fartlek. Fartlek is an extension of continuous running and should be employed at least once a week. Fartlek simply means speed play and involves the player introducing several bursts of faster running during a continuous running exercise. It develops aerobic endurance, but incorporates anaerobic elements with the bursts of faster running. Interval running, or simply intervals, refers to a series of repeated faster running over distances ranging from 100 to 800 meters, alternated with periods of recovery jogging or walking rather than complete rest. Longer, slower forms of interval training are best to develop general endurance in the preparation phase. Now, these should be conducted at least twice a week. This type of running training is most suited to the stop-go demands of football running. Muscular strength, power, and endurance are vital components of fitness for football. Strength is the ability to exert maximum force, and high levels of strength are important for football. It transfers positively for football activity requiring muscle and power endurance. Developing strength, therefore, becomes an important priority in the general preparation stage for top-level footballers today. Strength can be developed 8 to 12 times faster through weight training procedures than it can through skill-related training. For example, jumping power is best developed through weight training exercises like jumping squats. And a form of rebound training called plyometrics will be far more effective than just marking practices. There are several methods of weight or resistance training suitable for football. There are simple body resistance exercises like chins, dips, and sit-ups, medicine ball activity and bag punching, free weight work using barbells, for cleans, squats, and bench press work, use of dumbbells associated with running and jumping squats, and of course, the use of fixed apparatus for seated rowing, leg extensions, and calf raises. Weight training needs to be carefully periodized. During the preparation phase, 4 to 8 weeks need to be spent training with various resistance activities to develop general strength. Careful consideration must be given to such factors as age and structural physique factors of the individual when designing weight training programs. Copying top-level adult programs of weight training for junior or beginning weight trainers must be avoided. The most important factor with young lifters is to teach correct lifting technique and weight progression. In the specific preparation phase of about 8 to 12 weeks, players move on to close to full training, which involves both functional fitness training, running and strength training, becoming integrated now with skills type training with footballs. A very important training principle must start to operate at this point. This is the principle of specificity. Specificity is the most important training factor for successful performance in sport. Specificity simply means specific training drills or exercises and activities that are closely related to the actual function of playing football. Physiologically, such activities allow the body to adapt to the functional demands of the game. There are two types of training activity related to the specificity principle. The first category of activities are those that train and improve the various fitness capacities in isolation. Now, these include activities involving speed and agility, strength and power, or pure running activities to develop speed and power. With these types of activities, The muscle groups and the energy systems involved in football are trained. The second are drills and activities which come from the sport itself. These are game-like drills which mimic the functional demands of football. Now, right now, I want to make a very important point. There is no better way to develop fitness for football than to actually play the game. Football drills and match practice situations ultimately provide the best conditioning for the player. Training drills that help significantly in this way include handball and running drills like three-man weave, kick, hand pass drill, and a conditioned game such as touchball. Conditioned games such as outdoor touchball involve the anaerobic energy demands required for football, the sharp, flat-out bursts with the ball, elements of body contact, dodging and jumping, going to the ground and getting up again, and so on. One of the real difficulties facing the coach when conditioning his players is to be aware that individual differences exist between players. Every player is different, physically and mentally. Increasingly, at the top levels of football, players are being trained according to differences in size, body type, and physiological capacity. Also according to specific weaknesses they may possess in specific fitness capacities. The different demands of different playing positions must also be considered. Compare the differences in training needs for the ruckman and the rover. It's becoming important for the Australian rules football coach to understand physiology of the game. Not only does he need to know what the specific physiological fitness components for football are, but he must also be aware of the differences in the energy and fitness demands of all the playing positions in football. This knowledge is important in making an assessment of whether a player has the capacity to play a particular position. Certainly, all players will be developing the same components of fitness, but many will receive emphasis in certain components. For example, strength is important for the ruckman, and endurance is important for the rover. Now, let's look at the subject of fitness testing. Fitness testing is an important evaluation process that must be incorporated into every pre-season training program. It enables a coach to accumulate objective information about his players' fitness capacities. He can identify strengths and weaknesses in individual players, and then he's able to correct these weaknesses. Tests can be motivating for players to perform. They provide players with incentives to set goals and to improve and compare themselves with others. But organizationally, tests are time-consuming and require careful planning and administering to achieve accuracy. Let's look at some individual fitness tests. These can be time runs over any measured distance from 1 to 10 kilometers, but ideally about 4 to 6 kilometers. Players should be trying to run as fast a time as possible. General standards can be set for each club and individual standards set for each player. In this test, players are tested to determine the distance in meters they can run in 15 minutes. The simplest method of doing this is to place cones every 10 meters around a 400-meter running track. The FOS test is highly relevant to Australian rules football. It replicates the high-intensity, short rest type of running in football. This test involves players sprinting for 7 seconds and trying to cover as much ground in that time as possible, then resting for 23 seconds by jogging. The score in points is given for the distance covered. Players have to perform 20 sprints in succession, each every 30 seconds. This involves a timed 30-meter sprint. The test measures the ability of the player to accelerate and reach maximum speed over a 30-meter distance. This simple test is designed to measure the individual player's leg power. This is a sit and reach exercise that measures an important aspect of flexibility, that of the lower back and hamstring muscle length. It must be emphasized that flexibility in one joint and muscle group is not representative of overall flexibility. That's to say, flexibility is specific to the muscle group and the joint that is tested. Any club can conduct this series of muscular endurance tests as they require very little equipment or expertise. Basically, they are sit-ups and chin-ups. The aim of the sit-ups test is to determine the maximum number of sit-ups that can be performed by an individual player in 2 minutes. The chin-ups test is simply the maximum number of chin-ups a player can perform. Australian rules football, whilst a body contact sport requiring great power, is also a running game for most players. It's important that players are encouraged to maintain a positive ratio between high lean muscle mass and low body fat. Excess body fat is unwanted and energy-sapping extra baggage the player has to carry around in a game. Skin fold calipers measure the under-the-skin body fat players have. These can be roughly translated into a body fat percentage score that can tell a great deal about a player's body composition. The point to remember is that body weight alone, measured by scales, cannot provide accurate body composition information about a player because it does not differentiate between muscle and fat. Training loads in football are increasing. In the quest for higher levels of physical fitness, players today are training longer, harder, and more often than ever before. At the same time, however, we've seen an increase in injuries of a stress-related nature as a consequence of this greater volume of training. In general, high-intensity activity produces improvements in speed and power, while high-volume training leads to gains in endurance. All of these fitness components are vital to football. But combined high-intensity and high-volume training requires a great deal of energy expenditure and imposes fatigue and stress on the player, a fatigue that's both physical as well as psychological. Recovery from hard training becomes a very important factor in the training process if fitness gains are to be made. It's important for the coach to recognize that a player's rate of fitness improvement is dependent on the correct balance between hard training and adequate recovery. Obviously, the greater the fatigue, the greater the time required to recover. Inadequate recovery will cause fatigue to accumulate. The result is a drop in fitness levels, poor performance, and a greater chance of injury. The signs of accumulated fatigue are an elevated pulse rate at rest, a loss of appetite, a drop in body weight, irritability, and even sleeplessness. Sleep and rest are not the only means of recovery. Specific techniques of recovery, both of an active and passive nature, can enhance the whole recovery process. These recovery procedures should be an important part of the training routine. The recovery process is best improved by a combination of active and passive techniques. For example, an important active recovery technique is stretching. This should be performed after every training session and after every game. Other techniques are brisk walking, light jogging and swimming, and cycling on the day following a game or a hard training session. Gentle aerobic activity of this sort, combined with 10 to 15 minutes of stretching, is said to hasten the removal of waste products from fatigued muscles and also to lessen stiffness and soreness from maximum activity. Passive recovery techniques include massage. This can be performed immediately after training and up to 24 hours afterwards. It serves to increase blood flow to tired muscles, to alleviate tightness in them, and also to induce feelings of relaxation. Icing stops any microbleeding resulting from any form of bruising, and it reduces symptoms of muscle and joint inflammation, another byproduct of hard training. Hot baths, spas, and alternating hot and cold showers are also very useful in promoting blood flow and soothing tired muscles. While increases in the quantity and quality of training in football has resulted in greater fitness levels, coaches must also understand that time must be made available for players to recover from such training, and that the methods of recovery are also vital in the conditioning process. Diet and proper eating habits are also critical factors in recovery. Training and playing results in the body expending enormous amounts of energy. Since exercise burns up mainly carbohydrates together with some fat, it makes good sense that the best way to replace and store energy in the muscles is by eating a diet which is rich in complex carbohydrates. These should form up to 70% of the total diet. The modern footballer must take his eating habits very, very seriously. His body needs food, not only for energy, but also to assist with recovery from fatigue and with repairing muscle tissue. A well-balanced diet of meat, fish, low-fat dairy products, and in particular breads, cereals, fruits and vegetables are a must. Players should be encouraged to eat and drink fluids high in carbohydrates as soon as practicable after strenuous training and playing. Beware of dehydration. During physical exercise, the body heats up and produces sweat, mainly for cooling purposes. As a result, water is lost from the muscles, and this leads to a reduction of blood going to these muscles. Heart rate increases and the body slows down. When the air temperature is high, the problems of water loss become even greater. Thus, drinking fluid becomes very important to compensate for such losses, or the body will dehydrate. Dehydration leads to less capacity for work or exercise and increases the likelihood of heat exhaustion, even stroke. A 3% water loss through dehydration results in a reduced endurance capacity. With a 4% loss, these effects become more pronounced, particularly on muscular endurance. And if the loss exceeds 4 to 6%, serious medical complications suddenly arise. All this can happen very, very quickly, and even a large water intake at this point will not compensate for fluid loss. The answer is to keep players well hydrated all the time, particularly before and after training sessions. They should drink small amounts during training and drink before they feel thirsty. Once they're thirsty and it's hot, it's too late to get back into fluid balance during training. Dehydration will have already started. Cold water is still the best drink of all because it cools the insides of the body and it's quickly absorbed. During an extended training session, weak sugar mineral commercial drink products are also suitable. Remember, Heat-related problems occur very quickly, particularly when the environment is hot and humid. Exercise is intensive and lengthy. The player has not drunk fluid prior to or during training, or is already dehydrated before training starts, as a result perhaps of having consumed alcohol in the previous 12 hours. And now, let's look at warm-up and cool-down. Warming up before training and cooling down after training are crucial elements of every training session, just as they are essential before and after a game. Coaches must allow adequate time for both. A proper warm-up is essential to prepare the player and prevent any joint or muscular injury occurring through vigorous movement when the body is cold. Large muscle group activities, such as jogging and running, increase body temperature. With increased body and muscular temperature comes improved metabolic and muscular activity. A warm muscle moves more effectively than a cold one and is less likely to be injured. Correct stretching technique and selection of exercises prepares the muscles for football activity and further lessens the likelihood of injury. A stretch should be held for approximately 10 to 30 seconds. The breath should not be held during this time. The player should go to a point in the stretch where he feels a mild tension. A complete team warm-up and stretching segment should last approximately 15 minutes. After every training session, players should be given a less strenuous activity as part of the cooling down process, such as jogging a lap, some goal kicking, handballing to a partner. This should be then followed by a 5-minute stretching session of major muscle groups, such as the hamstrings, the calves, quadriceps, and the groin. Bringing a football team to their peak of fitness to play Australian rules football to the best of their skills and abilities is an absorbing task. More and more, there is a trend towards designing individual fitness programs to suit individual players' needs. In turn, the ability to analyze an individual's requirements has heightened the degree of skills required of the fitness coach. I hope that what I've presented in this video has been helpful to you, and that I may have aided you in identifying areas of fitness training where you can develop your own skills even further and help produce even better results for your football team. The role played by the fitness coach in Australian rules football is a vital and increasingly specialized one, and I wish you every success.